Good morning.
Good morning.
In the 5th century BC, Socrates was a citizen of Athens who spent most of his waking hours engaging his fellow citizens in conversation. He also annoyed and embarrassed them, a great many of them, by the questions he asked, and he was put to death by them in 399. We have nothing written by Socrates, but we have about him writings by Xenophon, by Aristophanes, and by Plato. This gives us some assurance that Socrates was a real person and not just a figment of Plato's imagination. The last 30 years of Socrates' life were a very troubled period in the history of Athens. It was the time of the Peloponnesian War, the conflict between Sparta and Athens. And at the same time, there was a bloody political conflict between two factions in Athenian society, the rich and the poor, the oligarchs and the democrats. And Socrates and Plato were personally involved in both of these conflicts. Plato, a disciple of Socrates, wrote many dialogues in which Socrates is the central character. But in all of them, except this one that you read, the one we're going to discuss today, Socrates occupies the center of the stage by questioning others about their fundamental beliefs. In this dialogue, unlike all the others, Socrates is the main speaker, and he talks about himself, his life, his ideas, his vocation, and his relation to his fellow citizens. This dialogue is called the Apology because in it, Socrates defends himself against various charges brought against him, and he pleads for his life. In one small section of it, we find Socrates engaged in a characteristic manner questioning one of his fellow citizens. That Socratic style of questioning, to get at the truth about something important, is the reason why we call the kind of teaching that is done in seminars of this kind teaching by the Socratic method of questioning. I would like to begin this seminar by asking you three questions to which I would like you to write down the answer on the piece of paper in front of you. The first question is, do you like or dislike Socrates as a person? The answer is either like or dislike, just one word each. Do you like or dislike Socrates as a person? The second question is, if you were alive at the time, imagine yourself being alive at the time, would you have enjoyed being a follower of Socrates, witnessing his interrogation of others? Answer to that is either yes or no. You would have enjoyed it or you would not have enjoyed it. Yes or no?
Enjoyed witnessing it or being
there, listening to the interrogation. Would you have enjoyed being a follower of Socrates, going around with him, watching him question his fellow citizens? That's the second question. And the third question is the most important. Imagine yourself, please, imagine yourself present at the trial of Socrates. And imagine that you had a voice in determining whether or not he was guilty or not guilty as charged. All those sitting in the amphitheater voted guilty or not guilty. The question is, how would you have voted? One word answer, guilty or not guilty? Guilty or not guilty? Put your answer down. Now I'd like to have a show of hands. You've got the answers on your piece of paper. How many of you said that you emotionally liked Socrates? Did anyone dislike him? I'm going to stop right there. Tell me why you disliked him, Darrell.
Well, the way he approached things and his view on wise people and how he viewed others, I kind of compare it to how Caesar thrice refused the crown, so that other people would say, oh, he is so great because he does not want to assume anything. And Socrates does the same thing, sort of. He doesn't say he is wise so that other people will say he's wise. I think he's a little bit hypocritical because...
I see. You think he's hypocritical?
Yes.
He's not being quite honest.
Right.
Laura, did you say also that you disliked him, Laura?
Yes, I did.
Why did you dislike him?
To me, he's very arrogant and irritating.
Arrogant, irritating. Mm-hmm. You would have found him very irritating indeed. Mm-hmm. Do you find me irritating?
You?
Yes.
No.
Well, I'm trying to do exactly what Socrates did. I'm asking you questions all the time. Do you find it irritating to be asked questions?
No, I
Then
don't.
why did you find Socrates irritating?
Because the questions that he asked were directed at people's knowledge and people's wisdom, which
I
is very
see.
precious to them.
I see. The rest of you who liked him, I'm going to be silent for a moment. I want to find out what your answer to the second question is. How many of you said yes to the second question, namely, you would have liked to be present at the time, following Socrates around while he was questioning his fellow citizens? How many said yes to that? Only Laura said no, right? You found him so irritating you didn't want to be there. But Darryl, you didn't like him, but you'd like to be there, right?
Right.
Why so, Darryl?
Well, I think it's still interesting. I may not like how he does things, but I'd like to learn by him.
I see. Now then, the third question. How many of you voted guilty? Sherry, tell me why.
Well,
No. Are you the only, all of you voted not guilty? Am I correct that Sherry alone said guilty? Sherry, we'll find out whether your colleagues are correct in their judgment or not. You do know that Socrates defends himself against two sets of charges, the old charges and the new charges. And therefore, it's my duty to ask you, did you find him guilty on both sets of charges, or only on the first set of charges, or only on the second set of charges? And to answer that question, you have to tell me what the first set of charges
right.
were.
That's my question.
What's your question?
My question is to what the charges are. I'm kind of
Well,
confused about those.
if you've got the text in front of you,
Right.
the first set of charges is on the right-hand column of page 200, and the second set of charges is on the in the left-hand column of page 201. Well, why don't you, can you see the charges there, Sherry?
As to where?
About 15 lines down on the right-hand column. See the word, but far more dangerous are the others? See those words there?
Where?
Do you see them? Mark, would you read it? Read the first set of charges, Mark, out loud.
Okay.
But far more dangerous.
But far more dangerous are the others, who began when you were children and took possession of your minds with their falsehoods, telling of one Socrates, a wise man, who speculated about the heaven above and searched into the earth beneath, and made the worse appear the better cause.
That's the first set of charges. You say he's.
Well, they're accusing him of that, and I don't think he's
No.
denying it.
Well, no. You think he's guilty of that?
Right.
Now, would you read, Tim, the charge on page 203 in the right-hand column? You see there was a paragraph beginning, I've said nothing in my defense.
I've said enough in my defense against the first class of my accusers. I turn to the second class. They are headed by Meletus, that good man and true lover of his country, as he calls himself. Against these two, I must try to make a defense. Let their affidavit be read. It contains something of this
Now, read
kind.
this very carefully and slowly out loud.
It says that Socrates is a doer of evil, who corrupts the youth, and who does not believe in the gods of the state, but has other new divinities of his own. Such is the charge, and now let us examine the particular counts.
What new thing is being said here? What
Corrupts the youth.
corrupts the youth? That's the essential thing about that later charge, is because, again, the charge of atheism doesn't believe in the divinity of the state is common to both. Now, I understand, Sherry, that you think he's not that he's
guilty of the
guilty
charge.
of all those charges.
Right.
How does he answer the charge that he's charged with not believing in the gods of the state? One of the gods of the state is Apollo, another is Zeus, another is... How does he answer that charge?
He says that he asked Meletus if how can a person believe in human things and not humans?
Yeah.
And how can a person believe in horsemanship and not horses?
Yeah.
And he says, well, I've proven to you that I believe in demigods because of his oracle. He
Yeah,
refers
that's precisely it.
And so if he believes in demigods, why doesn't he believe in
As a
God?
matter of fact, the oracle at Delphi, to whom he sent for a message, is the oracle of Apollo, which is one of the gods of the state. So that clearly he's not guilty on that charge. You let him off on that one now?
Right, I let him off on that.
Now, because I really want to know what it means to charge somebody, anybody, Socrates, anybody else, with making the worse appear the better reason. What kind of thinking is that? Making the worse appear, is it honest thinking or dishonest thinking? Yes?
Well, it's realistic thinking. As far as what he does, he says that the people who seem to be wise are not, and the people who seem to be foolish are actually wise. That's the worse appear, the better. Yeah. But actually, in his mind, that they're not just appearing better, they are better.
Alan?
It's biased thinking is what it is. When you have an issue, there are two sides, obviously, to every issue, and they're saying he's making the worst side seem the better. And so
Yes, go ahead.
it seems to me that it's the prejudice of the people against him. They believe that they should do one thing, and he thinks that they should do another. And they're just saying, well, he's making the worst seem the better.
Suppose you were a lawyer in a court, a lawyer defending a criminal, and you had a very weak case to defend because the criminal generally appeared guilty. Wouldn't you try to make him appear innocent? If your job was as a defense attorney.
Yes.
So in that case, you might try to make a weaker reason appear a stronger reason, might you not?
I might.
Well, the reason why that's an interesting charge is there were, I must tell you this because you wouldn't know this from the dialogue. At the time that Socrates was alive, there were a group of men in Athens called the Sophists. By the way, the word sophist means wise man. I mean, Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. And they were teachers, but they were law teachers. They were first law professors because in Athens at the time, there were no lawyers. Every citizen, like Socrates, if he was charged, had to defend himself in court, or if he was another citizen, he had to bring charges in court. And so every citizen had to be taught how to argue in court for or against a point, for himself or in defense of himself or against somebody else. And the Sophists were teachers who tried to help people make the worse appear the better reason. And in a sense, this charge is a charge that Socrates is a sophist. Now, one more thing about this, because it could come back to our friend Sherry over here. These first teachers, they were the first paid teachers in history. The Sophists took money for teaching other people how to argue in court. How does Socrates, anyone, raise a hand on this, how does Socrates argue against the charge that he's a sophist? Yes?
Because he says he doesn't know anything.
No? Against the charge that he's a sophist. Yes?
He doesn't take money for
That's
his...
right.
Oh.
He says, you all know I've never taken money for my teaching. I don't teach anybody. So that's the charge, Sherry, that he's not a sophist. And the charge that he makes the worse appear the better reason is the charge that he's a sophist. He defends himself that way. You understand, Sherry?
No, repeat that.
The charge that's brought against him, that he makes the worse appear the better reason, is really charging with being like other people,
Right, showing
like the
both
sophists,
sides.
who took money for teaching people to defend themselves in court. And he says, but I've never taken any money for any teaching I've done. I think it's all right, but I don't do it. Doesn't that answer the charge that he makes the worse appear the better
Well, that's
reason?
the only issue, that he doesn't take the money, but yet he's still doing the same, working the
I
same
see. You
beliefs.
think he's doing the same thing.
Right.
All right, let's go on to the next charge. When his fellow citizens charge him with corrupting the youth, do you think it is because the young people that follow Socrates come home and question their beliefs?
I think that maybe his questioning, putting in the questioning instinct in the youth, and they come home and they sort of act as an extension of Socrates, and they start questioning their elders, and their elders get angry with him, and he thinks, and the elders may think that he's making them rebellious and corrupting them in that way.
Certainly, if Socrates did make the young people who followed him around go home and be quarrelsome with their parents, or shall I say, and raise questions and sort of be critical, that would annoy their parents considerably, wouldn't it?
It would.
That's one way in which Socrates annoyed his fellow citizens. What other way did Socrates annoy and correct and irritate his fellow citizens? What about his manners? What made him an annoying fellow to have around?
He was rude.
Pardon me?
He was rude, you know.
Rude?
He just wouldn't beat around the bush. If he thought you were wrong, he just, no, you're wrong. So,
Well,
guess he made people feel stupid. And
made people
smart
stupid.
people don't like to feel like they're dumb. They don't like to.
Alan?
In one sentence on page 202, he says, thereupon I tried to explain to him that he thought himself wise, but was not really wise. And the consequence was that he hated me.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of, I can see why somebody who would be annoyed with that.
Can you tell me again from the dialogue, what made Socrates start out going around questioning his fellow citizens? Yes, Laura Pig.
Well, he said that one of his friends, Cherophon, had asked the god of Delphi
Yeah.
if there was anyone wiser than him. And he said no, that he was the wisest man.
In Athens.
Yes, and later on in the reading, he says that he was told by divine power that he must go around and find out what this wisdom was and what made him wiser than anyone else.
And here Socrates hears from the Delphic oracle that he's the wisest man in Athens. That astounds him, doesn't it? because he suspects he's not the wisest man in Athens. So how does he go out and test this out? What does he do to find out what the oracle means by calling him the wisest man in Athens?
Well, he goes about asking people that he believes to be wise.
Yeah.
He goes
Who
around
think
and-
themselves wise.
Right, who think themselves wise. He goes around and asks them questions to determine whether they are wise or not.
What does he find out when he asks the artisans or the poets or the politicians questions about their work? What does he find out?
Well, every time he finds out the same thing, that everyone thinks that they know a lot more than they really do know.
In fact, they claim to know what they don't know.
Right.
And Socrates finally concludes that his wisdom consists in what? They think they know what they don't know. What does his wisdom consist in, yes?
He accepts what he knows,
So
and
he
he
knows
knows the
that he
limits
doesn't
of
know.
his wisdom, yeah.
He knows what he doesn't know. He doesn't claim to know what he doesn't know, right?
Right.
Does he, a person who claims that he knows very little, in fact, doesn't Socrates say at one point that no man is wise, only God is wise?
Yes, he does.
So he claims to have no wisdom himself at all, correct? Now then, so the reason why he went around annoying his fellow citizens or causing all this trouble is because he was trying to find out what the gods meant, what the oracle meant by calling him the wisest man in Athens. And this, you say, irritated a lot of people, annoyed them. In another passage, Socrates says, does he know, by the way, are you being moved to change your mind at all?
No. I still think he's guilty there as charged as far as being right or wrong.
Let's come back to this. He says he's not an atheist because he does believe in the gods of the state.
Right, okay,
He says he's not an investigator. That they've confused him with Anaxagoras, who was a scientist, and I'm not a scientist. I don't investigate. They charge him with making the worse appear the better reason, which is one of the things the sophist did. The sophist took money for teaching, and he says, I'm not a sophist. I've never taken any money for anything I've ever done. Never taught anything that took money for it. And finally, we come to this one charge that remains, corrupting the youth. And you think he's guilty of that one?
He's not denying that he isn't corrupting the youth. He's saying that he's telling them to question their elders and look at both sides.
Well, now the question, everything now turns, Sherry, on what the word corruption means. If you corrupt something, you make it worse than it is.
Right,
Right?
in
Do
a negative way.
you think that when Socrates leads the young people to question their elders, he's making them worse or better by doing so?
Better. It's not, corrupt might be too strong a word.
But that's what his... But
That's what his people are saying because they're accusing him of it. So they're
I see.
saying that it's corrupt because they disagree.
And you
with-
think they're right and he's wrong.
Well, I think that Socrates, the children have the right to
Question. their
question. But then again, they're their elders, so
elders.
I'm contradicting myself.
No, you're not contradicting yourself because there are two sides to this question.
Right.
The elders may think that it's bad for their children to question them, correct? They would call a teacher who does that, a person who does that, makes their children do that,
Because it's
corrupting the
threatening.
youth. But if you say that making them do that makes them better, not worse, then they're not corrupted, they're not being corrupted.
No, corrupt is not the word.
At one point in the dialogue, Socrates says that his fellow citizens should really give him great honors for the service he's done to the state. How does he describe the service he's done to the state? What does he compare himself to?
Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, at one point in the dialogue, he compares himself, I think I can tell you where it is, it's on page 207. He says, I've been a great servant of the state. I ought to be honored instead of being tried for my life. What is his service to the state? How does he describe himself? Anyone? Yes?
He considers himself a gadfly, as he says, that constantly arousing and persuading and reproaching you. And he says the state he compares the state to a noble steed who is tardy in his motions.
Kind of a lazy, sleepy steed.
And he compares himself to that gadfly.
And a gadfly does what to a horse that's sleepy?
Stings.
Stings it, wakes it up, makes it move. Now, he says, I've been a gadfly to the state. Say a little more about what that means.
Well, I think in any state, there are a lot of matter of fact, he says it at the top of the next page. He says about the unrighteous deeds which are done in a state. There are a lot of things that are done in a state that are wrong, and in a state, you know, it's a big bureaucratic machine, and a lot of things get lost, and, you know, you hear about it every day now in the papers, you know,
Yeah.
the contracts and things like that. And because it's so big and tardy, it is like a steed. It's just kind of lazy, and it needs to be, you know, constantly,
Kept on its toes.
yeah, kept on its toes. Otherwise, it'll get lazy and decline.
Keep things going forward instead of moving backwards.
Well, he says, I'm a sort of gadfly given to the state by God, and the state is a great and noble steed who is tardy in his motions, owing to his very size, and requires to be stirred into action or life. I am that gadfly which God has attached to the state, and all day long and in all places am always fastening upon you, arousing and persuading and reproaching you, stinging, stinging, stinging. He thinks that's doing a service to the state. Do we have, is there any person that you know in the United States you'd call a gadfly, a political gadfly? Yes,
Well,
Jesse, yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say the evangelists,
Yeah.
Billy Graham and all those are, you know, they reproach people for going astray, and they try to correct the way things are.
Yes, Chris?
The press can act as a gadfly because they're always watching. They're making sure that everything goes. They're putting in new ideas, and they won't
Commentators
let.
on TV?
Yeah, they try not to let things stagnate.
Yes?
Say Ralph Nader was a gadfly.
I think probably that's a very good individual. Very annoying fellow. Lots of people don't
Yeah,
like
he
him.
is.
In fact, I'm sure there are lots of Americans in large corporations that would like to put Ralph Nader to death the way the Athenians put Socrates to death. No, Ralph Nader was a gadfly. There have been gadflies in American history. Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Civil Disobedience and opposed the war against Mexico and fought against slavery, was a gadfly like that and went to jail for being a gadfly. Do you think that's a good defender? How about that one, Sherry?
That he is a gadfly?
Yeah, well, he is a gadfly, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
But
He does
they
arouse.
didn't charge him with being that. He charged himself
He
with
charged
being
himself with being that.
that. What I'm asking you is, which is the correct statement about Socrates? On the one hand, he seems to be saying, I'm not a teacher. I've never taught anybody anything. And if anyone says I am, he's a liar. And then here on this page is, I tell you that virtue is not given by money, that from virtue comes money and every other good of man. This is my teaching. As he said below, I know that injustice and disobedience is evil. So that he is saying in various places what he knows. Or look again, if you would, another go to 209 on the right-hand column. This is after he's been the verdict has come in, and the verdict is guilty. By the way, the verdict comes in is by a great majority or by a very small majority? Very small. I mean, just a few votes would have changed the matter, so that all the citizens of Athens were not against Socrates, but only a little more than half, right? As far as the verdict is concerned. In that right-hand column on 209, he says, reflecting that I was really too honest a man to be a politician and live. I repeat those words. Reflecting that I was really too honest a man to be a politician and live. I did not go where I could not do no good to you or to myself, but where I could do the greatest good privately to every one of you. Thither I went, and sought to persuade every man among you, that he must look to himself and seek virtue and wisdom before he looks to his private interests, and look to the state before he looks to the interests of the state. This should be the order which he observes in all his actions. Again, isn't he saying that I have to try to persuade you this is the right way to behave? Yes.
On the second half of, let's see, it's right above the dotted line on page 209.
Yep.
He says, "For if, O men of Athens, by force of persuasion and entreaty I could overpower your oaths, then I should be teaching you to believe that there are no gods." And later, 2 sentences after that, he says, "For I do believe that there are gods," in a sense higher than that. He's saying right there that he would like, isn't he saying that he would like to teach them this?
Yes.
And he says, by force of persuasion. I thought he was saying before that if anyone said that he was trying to persuade someone, then they were liars. And there he just said it himself.
That's what I'm wondering, Darrell. Is it this kind of thing that bothers you about Socrates? That on the one hand he says, I'm not a teacher, I don't go around teaching, I don't persuade anybody, and yet in the course of the dialogue he is saying many things that he's tried to persuade people of.
Well, he's not a teacher in the fact that he tells people what is right, but he tells people what is wrong. And so by keep on telling what is wrong and that's not right and get it better and try and think again, he eventually leads people to find out what is right or what is right for them. The truth, not by telling them that's the truth, but by telling them that's not the truth and have them find it out for themselves.
That's not what he's saying in that instance, though. He said, I should be teaching you to believe that there are no gods. Or I should be teaching you.
Yeah.
He's just telling them, he's not saying that what you believe should be wrong. He's just flat out saying, this is what I should be doing.
If you listen to the same passage he wrote, he says, "For if, O men of Athens, by force of persuasion and entreaty, I could overpower your oath, then I should be teaching you to believe that there are no gods." Yet, what he's talking about is he would never have mentioned gods in his persuasion if he broke down on his knees and cried.
Yeah.
He would have never said that there were gods. That would be inferred by the person listening, by the judges. So in a sense, he's not really teaching. People are picking things out of what he says. In that sense, he is teaching, but that requires somebody else, a mutual, somebody who is interested in what he's saying.
So he's unintentionally teaching.
You think he's
Directly.
unintentionally teaching. But your point, Laura?
Yes, that is my point.
What I don't know, follow that. What is the difference between an intentional teacher and an unintentional teacher?
Well, a mother is an unintentional teacher of her child. She takes care of her child and she guides her child through life, just as Socrates is trying to guide the people in Athens through life and making sure that they live their lives because he cares about them. But he's not setting out his life to teach.
Let me see if I can understand you. Your case of the mother is one, but some teachers teach by lecturing. And Socrates doesn't lecture, he asks people questions. But you say that by asking questions, he gets them to think for themselves and help them reach the truth, doesn't he? Try to make them reach the truth? Isn't he concerned with getting right answers rather than wrong answers?
Yeah.
Doesn't he keep, when they give a wrong answer, doesn't he ask further questions to shake them loose from the wrong answer? Then why isn't that teaching, why isn't questioning that way to get you to think correctly intentional teaching as much as lecturing? Yes?
It's more of an expressing of an opinion. He's letting them know what he believes and letting them draw their conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes?
think that's one of the things that's bothering the people, the citizens, if you want to call them
Yeah.
citizens.
They're all citizens of Athens, yes.
If he's trying to teach them a correct answer, and like we're saying...
He's not giving them the correct
okay,
answer.
he's not teaching it to them.
Yeah.
But if they bring forth what he calls a wrong answer and he questions them further to have them rephrase their answer, maybe if they keep giving answers and he keeps thinking they're quote-unquote wrong, then he's going to keep asking
That's right.
questions. But what if they don't feel they're wrong?
Well, if they...
I mean, if he asks another question, they can say, my last answer was what I felt. That's an opinion rather than a right or wrong answer.
He can't do anything with them then at all. He can only succeed if his questions really unsettle them, make them change their minds. If he doesn't make them change his minds, he can't succeed. Yes?
I'm saying that he's intentionally trying to provoke them to learn and to understand. But teaching as such, if I were to teach William 2 + 4 = 6, that is showing him how to do things. More or less, Socrates is helping his student William to find out for himself that 2 + 4 = 6. He's not saying that 2 + 4 = 6. He's saying 2 + 4 = what, William? And if William says 5, he's saying, now why is that so if 4 = this, that, and the other?
Well, if the result is that if by Socrates questioning Williams, he gets Williams to realize that 2 + 4 does equal 6, not 5, then William has learned as a result of his teaching, hasn't he?
But William taught himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
William taught himself. No, Socrates taught William.
No, but William got
learned
there.
himself, but
Right,
Socrates' questions was a form of teaching that helped William learn by himself. Yes?
Are
Yes?
you saying just like how you did with Sherry? We all said it was guilty.
Yeah.
He was not guilty, and she said he was guilty, and we all kept giving her questions and examples, but she told herself her opinion.
I'm not sure we've changed Sherry's mind
Yeah,
yet.
but we're working on it, you know, like the same type thing.
Now, think about that for a moment now. You're virtuous. You never do anything wrong. You never overeat, overdrink, oversleep, overplay. You never injure anybody else. You act righteously. You are righteous through and through. Is it true that no evil can happen to you?
I don't think so.
Well,
all right.
You have to say a little more than that. You have to
Okay.
tell me. You have to tell me how, even though we're imagining something now, William. No one is as virtuous as I've made you out to be.
Right. I was going to say, you know,
Well,
I'm not
let's
a
play the
perfect
game that
person,
way.
but you know.
Well, what kind of evils can happen to a virtuous man? Yes. Actually,
Really,
yes.
I just don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that
I
at
mean,
all.
The best of people get murdered. I mean,
They could be virtuous.
or
And, yes.
you know, you can just be a priest or what. The Pope could get. Somebody tried to shoot the Pope. I mean, he's a pretty virtuous guy, I guess. You know, and
Well,
something pretty evil happened to him. But I guess it might be how you look at something evil, and I guess. Well,
now,
let's just put it.
The question is, that's exactly right. Plato must be thinking, or Socrates must be thinking here, that to be killed by somebody else, or to be maimed, or suppose you're walking in New York City and you're mugged and seriously injured, or some dear relative of you, dear friend of yours, someone you love dies, or a sudden change of circumstances reduces your family to poverty. These are not evil. What can Plato mean, or Socrates speaking here, by saying there can't be any evil that happens to a good man? The only thing that's good is virtue, and the only thing that's bad is the absence of virtue. Yes?
Maybe if something evil happens to someone, what might be perceived as evil, it can be for the good in the end. Like if someone in an accident, they're made deaf, and they just had no vocation before, they may be a teacher for the deaf, and they may help other people in that way.
I don't understand what you mean by a virtuous person. I mean, you mean just like...
You do understand what I mean by a virtuous person, don't you?
Does virtuous mean honest? I mean, does it mean good?
Honest, courageous, temperate,
Okay.
just, doesn't injure anybody else. That's what Plato's saying, is a virtuous man, a man of good character, sound moral character. No evil can happen to him. Now that's it. Yes.
So does he mean that no evil can happen to him if the evil that he brings on himself?
The only way he can bring evil on himself is to lose his virtue and become vicious, right? You're quite correct, Todd. Plato could say, yes, I can injure myself, but in fact what you're saying, Todd, is very interesting. Plato can be saying here, or Socrates for Plato, the only person that can injure me is me. No one else, and the world around me can't injure me. If I'm virtuous, I am invulnerable, untouchable. But yes?
I think what he means is that if a man is truly good and truly virtuous, the only way evil could happen to him was if he could be corrupted. And if he's truly virtuous, that could never happen.
You mean having his arm broken, or suffering a serious disease, or losing all his money is no evil?
Well,
what would you say, William? No? Say no to that?
I say no to that, yeah. That's not evil to lose your money. It may be evil if you gamble, you know, it's evil the way you lose the money, but just losing the money.
Well, let me just say, you have here one of the great issues in moral philosophy that you've been examining. Socrates, and then following him, the Roman Stoics, very much what you said, Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus said, all depends on how you interpret it. If you don't call it evil, it isn't evil. They held the view that the only thing really good was moral virtue, and the only thing evil was moral vice. Aristotle said, no. Moral virtue is a good, but there are other goods too. Wealth is a good, health is a good, knowledge is a good, friendship is a good, freedom is a good. Being enslaved is an evil. If you're enslaved, if you're taken as a slave and treated as a slave, that's an evil you suffer. And there's a real difference between those who think that nothing can affect the virtuous man, and Aristotle, on the other hand, who says, well, virtue is important, but not enough. There are other goods too, and a virtuous man can suffer evil.
Well, going back to Socrates, I'm starting to think a little bit along the ways.
Yeah.
He says that virtue is not given by money, but virtue comes from money and every other good of man. So all the other...
Just think of that a moment now. Now you've nailed Socrates with an inconsistency. Well, that's a wonderful thing you've just done, Darrell. From virtue comes money and every other good of man. That must mean, if you take those words seriously, must it not, that there are other goods than virtue. If from virtue comes money or wealth and every other good of man, then there are other goods than virtue. Yes.
But
Sandy,
if there are virtues and other goods, and there's no virtue, that's the contradiction between there's only virtue and there's virtue and goods.
That's right.
So you have to pick one of those before you can say
That's
this other
right.
statement.
So The two statements are, virtue and virtue alone is the sole good of man, in which case if you've got virtue, nothing bad can happen to you. The other statement is, virtue is an important good, you can even say an original or primary good, but there are other goods, correct? And on the second one, on the second statement, being deprived of the other goods is suffering and evil, correct? And which of those two do you take now?
Well, I think
Which of
if-
those two do you take?
I take that there are virtues and other goods, so that this statement is wrong. But if Socrates, we have to have him here, we have to ask him if he believes there is only virtue is good, or if there are other goods.
Yes. No,
Virtue
we
is
don't
the-
have him here, so we have to decide for ourselves, don't we?
Well, if we decide for ourselves, we have to use our own opinions, but
we have to think about the meaning of these words. Whenever you find a contradiction in a text, where the author seems to be saying two things that don't go together, that's a wonderful thing to find, because of the two things, one must be true. They both can't be true, and one must be false. So finding a contradiction is a marvelous way to get at the truth. And now I come back to you, Laura, because you're still on the dislike side, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
I don't know whether I've moved Darryl, but how about you?
Well, I followed this whole thing about wisdom, and I understand that. But what still bothers me about Socrates is the fact that he seems to think that he is doing everyone good.
Don't you think he is?
Yeah.
Don't you think he is? Don't you think the people who suffered embarrassment as a result of his exposing their ignorance, and or who were irritated by his questioning, that he performed a good service for them? Or you think that annoyance is just an annoyance? No good came from it.
Well, if they're led to examine themselves and try to find out something,
Then it could happen.
Yes.
Now, suppose
But if it's just irritating and it just bothers them,
I
it's
asked,
fine.
I don't quite know why you say this, because the question is, don't you like him? By liking him, I mean, if Socrates were in a room outside, and you could either go out and talk to him and be with him, or avoid him by going out another door, which way would you turn?
I would talk to him. I think he's interesting, but I don't like him.
What do you mean by
like
not
his
liking
manner. I don't like his manner. He's interrogating. He upsets people.
him? Well, I've been kind of nasty this morning. Don't you like me?
Yes, I like you.
Well, I've been trying to be Socratic, I mean, about different matters, about being Socratic about these questions raised by this dialogue, trying to find out what you think. And I don't see why you don't like, if you like me, why don't you like Socrates?
Well, I like you, Dr. Adler, but
Thank you.
He's a little more maybe he's a little more persistent with his, because it seems to me that there's people who want to learn and there's people who don't want to learn. And the people who don't want to learn are the ones who are going to get upset, or who can't find the answers.
And
They're
they're
going
gonna
to
like
get frustrated, but they're
see,
not
I-
necessarily frustrated at him. They're frustrated with themselves because they can't find the answer.
So they will find
They won't like him, and that's why the slight majority of 30 people that voted Socrates guilty didn't like him. But the question is, why doesn't Laura like him? She wants to learn. She's not like those people. Is that correct?
Yeah, she wants to learn, but
She might
Yeah.
respect him, for living up to his standards and everything,
not like
but
him.
not like him. And, you ask us why we like you and why the other people didn't like him, but, we're not professionals in a field of, we're still in our learning stages and we're supposedly not really wise in anything yet.
I
So,
think that's correct.
sure, we're not going to be really, what's the word? Just
it won't bother us.
it doesn't
Right.
really bother us when people tell us we're wrong, because we don't really think we're right all the time. But these people that he said, it's like somebody going up to Ronald Reagan and saying, "I'm sorry, Ronald, but you're just wrong." And or somebody.
Where do you stand on this? You like Socrates or not?
I like the way he makes you think.
And Greg, where do you stand?
I think that she thinks of him, kind of like the gadfly. She doesn't want to pay.
The horse doesn't like the gadfly. There's no question about that.
That's why she doesn't like him. The gadfly irritates her, and she just doesn't want to have anything to do with it.
Well,
Go ahead.
I guess what I think is that it seems like he doesn't give people a fair enough chance. That when he's interrogating
you think
someone.
his tactics are unfair. That's what you really have against him. He's really not quite fair in the way he questions people. Is that what you're saying, Alan?
If he's asking a question and the answer comes out exactly, you know,
The way
that
he
agrees with
wanted
his
it to.
point, I mean, I don't think you can ask anybody a question that's going to make them agree with your point. This is one of those little trick jokes you get back in 6th grade. There's no way to make somebody agree with what you're going to say.
Absolutely
It's just an arbitrary question. And I don't see why you people don't, why you dislike his manner, because if somebody professes to know something and they don't know anything about it, you know, say it's a teacher at a high school and they don't know anything about their subject and they get thrown out, you would have no remorse for that person at all. And that person would be pretty angry. But now you're kind of taking the side of the people who are getting angry, but it's their fault. They're the ones that said they knew something about it. And I look at it like no pain, no gain, you know?
Well, I guess what bothers me about the whole thing is that he just seems to have no mercy towards these people. It's just like, you're wrong.
Why
that's
should
it,
he?
Why
period.
should he? Why
And
should
I
he?
agree they are wrong. Their
Well, look.
faults should be pointed out, but I don't like the way he does it.
During this discussion, I tried to put you on the spot, all of you. I had no mercy in the sense that I wanted you to face a very difficult philosophical issue. I don't really care which side you took, but I want to be sure you know you couldn't say both. You couldn't say, on the one hand, virtue is the only good. On the other hand, that from virtue comes other goods. You can't say both those things, and you had to make a choice. I'm merciless about that. I wouldn't let you get away with it. If you say, oh, I want to say both, I'd say you can't say both. Would I be wrong about that? If I were really hard on that point, insisted you, well, then that's what all that Socrates is doing. Yes?
Well, as far as disliking or liking, not his manner, not his teachings or whatever he does, but the arrogance, the attitude, because dislike or like is an ambiguous question. It involves stuff that you can't put it down. Now, do you agree or disagree, yes or no? Because he appears closed, he's supposed to be wise, but...
You use the word arrogant. What do you mean by let's say with
He
that.
thinks he's better, okay? He says here, I'm ashamed to confess. All his graciousness in saying that, oh, I'm not as good as I appear. That's just a facade, and he tries to manipulate people's thing. He really isn't. He's just arrogant, okay? And
You've said it 3 times. Yes, David. Greg, I mean.
Well, when he started out, when he found out that the God said that he was the wisest, he didn't believe it. And the only time that you say that he got arrogant is after he found out that he was the wisest. That's not arrogance.
Wisest in that very special sense, in the very special sense of not knowing what he didn't know. Remember, that's what he found out. When he heard from the gods that he was the wisest man in Athens, he tried to understand what that meant by going around and questioning others who claimed to be wise and found out that they were not wise, but fools, and that his wisdom consists in avoiding the folly of supposing he knew what he didn't know. That doesn't mean he doesn't know something, but he didn't pretend to know what he didn't know. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow morning. Let me open this discussion by calling your attention to something I did that you may want to ask me about. And I must admit that I did not do this in the first 5 or 6 times that I conducted a discussion of Plato's Apology, but somewhere along the 8th or 9th time I discovered how to do it. So it doesn't come at once. I really only had 3 questions. The 3 questions I asked at the beginning were the 3 questions that I stuck to through a lot of other questions happened as a result of what they said. But I kept coming back to the question of liking him, whether he was doing something that you'd interested in seeing him do, or whether he was guilty or not. And that of course, opened up all the questions about the old charges and the new charges and Socrates' view of himself and why people were irritated by him. But it's important, I think, almost a general rule is if you can do it, if it's possible to do, to open a seminar with 2 or 3 mind-grabbing questions that everybody answers, as they did here, sometimes by show of hands, sometimes by writing on a piece of paper, and then pursuing their reasons, and then asking more questions as you go along. Now, what questions have you got to ask of me? Or comments, anything? Yes.
I think a very practical question. I noticed throughout that you always called the youngster's name and then asked the question,
Yes.
which is somewhat different from standard practice, and I wondered why you did that.
I think because I think I'm in the habit of doing that, but I warned them before we started that I would often ask someone a question, then turn to somebody else and ask them to answer the same question, so they were not left sitting at, thinking they only had to answer that one person was going to answer the question. And it I think, enables the person that I've called on to focus sharply on that question. But I don't do it always. Sometimes I ask them all to ask the question, answer the question, rather. I think you do anyone. Sometimes you can throw the question out and say, show of hands. Sometimes you call on somebody and ask the question, then ask 2 or 3 people to answer it as well. Sometimes you ask them to write the question down and answer the question on a piece of paper and reflect upon that. Any way of doing it, I think, not just one way of doing it.
I wanted to ask you, you said that Socrates can only succeed if his questions unsettle the citizens, and you were pursuing that process. And what I was curious about was that Sherry was the only one who said that Socrates was guilty at the trial, and there were 20 others who were fairly comfortable in assuming that he was
not guilty.
Excuse me, that not guilty, that he wasn't. And I was curious why you chose a line of questioning to try and unsettle Sherry, as opposed to choosing a line of questioning that might unsettle the other 21.
That's very good. In fact, now that you mention it, I think I should have done it the other way around. As a matter of fact, it would have been better, since there had been more people on the receiving end, if I'd said, don't you think Sherry's right? I mean, if I'd made them defend. On the other hand, the Socrates' defenses to all the charges except one are so plain. I mean, he obviously believed in the gods. He obviously was not a scientist. He obviously was not a sophist. I mean, those things. So that the only real charge, the only charge that would produce a difference of opinion is corrupting the youth. And on that one, by the way, the parents whose children came home and disturbed them were perfectly right in charging with corrupting the youth. And the question is whether all teachers shouldn't corrupt the youth and disturb the parents, which I think you're quite correct. It would have been better, I think, to do it the other way. You can do it either way. And if you had I was hoping for a more evenly divided, then I don't know why I did that. In fact, I can't explain that.
Along that same line, since they were almost all unanimous in their verdict of innocence, if Sherry had gone the line of the others, what would have been your first tactic if they had all been unanimous?
I would have then tried to argue for his guilt. Oh, sure. You must always do that. Well, I'm sorry, I disagree with all of you. I think he's guilty. Make me change my mind, you see. What you want to do is, what you always want to do is to set up a confrontation so that they're forced to think on the opposite sides of a question. It really is, the technique is very much what I would recommend for anyone trained to debate. You should be able to debate both sides of any question. You should be able to take the affirmative or the negative. If you only can take the affirmative, you're not a good debater. And in this kind of teaching, you must be able to take either side and make it work, you see.
I felt like
Yes.
it worked, excuse me.
Probably.
I felt like it worked for the positive also because the students were very nervous about today. And when you asked them the short answer questions, it enabled them to give an answer and to respond. And that initial response where so many of them were together gave them a camaraderie, and that opened them up.
That's
and
very important.
I felt like that helped a great deal.
And the same thing will happen tomorrow. I've got 4 questions to which they all write either the words agree or disagree, but they're all in on it. If you can possibly ask an opening question that gets them all in on it, an easy, not an easy question, but a question that requires a yes or no answer or a one-word answer, you've got that effect. You're quite right about that. If you ask a very elaborate question at the beginning, I mean, the kind of questions I asked at the end about those moral problems, if you asked that at the beginning, you'd lose them, you see. You must build up to that kind of question in the course of the seminar. You must save those for the end, you see.
Obviously, in asking leading questions, you must have a point in the back of your mind. What happens if they do not reach the point that you want them to?
You see, I don't know that, I have to say, I don't think I had any point in the back of my mind. I mean, I don't know whether there's a right answer to the question, was Socrates guilty as charged? I mean, obviously the jury divided very closely, so I don't know what I do have in the back of my mind are the kind of questions I want them to think about. They left here with some questions unanswered. They really don't. I'll wager that as you go back in the bus, they'll argue all the way back about whether it's better to do or suffer injustice, and whether justice. I mean, the most important thing about a seminar is to leave them with difficult questions unanswered, partly answered, partly discussed, but not. Now, here's the truth. See, I don't start out. I shouldn't say that. On the question of whether Socrates is right or Aristotle is right, I think Aristotle's right, and I think I can prove it. But I didn't try to do that today. I didn't try to. I merely indicated what the issue was. I didn't try to defend a position that I would take myself, because that's not my job as a teacher on this occasion, you see. If I was giving a lecture, I would do it, but not in a seminar. Follow me?
Then how far would you pursue that in trying to get them to?
I would not pursue it beyond getting the issue clear and making them face the issue. Okay. I wanted them to see there was a contradiction in the text. I wanted them to see that Socrates, on the one hand, said, I don't teach anybody anything. Here he was teaching a lot of things, you see. I wanted them to see that about Socrates, that on the one hand, I don't know anything and I don't teach. On the other hand, here's what I know with a certitude, you see. And it's very important to have them aware that to catch in reading, the art of reading is really to perceive those contradictions in the text. No one, I assure you, no one writes without contradicting himself. And that's when you, any good writer, the very greatest writers, Aristotle and Rousseau de Mario, I'll show you the contradictions there when we get there. And it's terribly important to see them as you read them, because that catches your mind. When you face a contradiction, you've got to make a decision. You can't take it both ways. That's the aim, not conclusions. Yes.
I liked your question about whether they liked Plato, because that was a personal question.
Yeah.
But I think that Daryl and Laura, even though Daryl said that Plato was arrogant.
Yeah. I mean Socrates.
Yeah, excuse me, Socrates. I think they also meant, they kept saying it without using the word, was self-righteous. And smug, even.
Arrogant, smug, self-righteous.
Yeah.
Hypocritical, another word they use.
But this thing of liking somebody, whether they like the person as opposed to what they say, is very different. And I wasn't sure that everyone understood that.
Well, you see, I didn't make the point. Again, was there any relation between the fact that, except for two, they all liked him, and except for one, they all found him not guilty? If they, suppose you pose the questions that had gotten the following answers, that most of them disliked him, but most of them thought he was innocent. That would have been more startling. Or most of them liked him, but most of them thought he was guilty, you see? The correspondence of most of them liking him, most of them thinking he was innocent, is interesting, and I didn't make enough of that, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Didn't make enough of that. You see? Yes?
I just thought that was a point that you could have...
Oh, sure.
Well,
I mean, I think as you talk, it's perfectly obvious as you listen to a seminar, and I've done this when I've listened to other people conduct seminars, you can think of all the things the seminar lead didn't think of. It's easy to do that when you're on the spot. Let me tell you. But I mean, that's interesting because it indicates that the seminar has all kinds of opportunities, so many opportunities that you don't take them all, as a matter of fact. You don't take them all. I missed several, obviously, yes.
As a teacher, well, as a person, actually, I agreed with Daryl and Laura, and they seem to me just to be sort of grappling with an inability to say or to articulate what they were trying to get at. As a teacher, what are the skills that they need to acquire? What might they have done in order to be more articulate in presenting their position so that other people then could zero in on it and disagree or defend?
I think they were quite articulate. I mean, I understand the sense in which Socrates could be called hypocritical. I understand the sense in which he could be called arrogant. He certainly was irritating and annoying. Lots of people found him irritating and annoying. But the point that interested me was that I was trying to do to them what Socrates did to his fellow citizens, and if they liked me, I was trying to see, well, why do you like him, and you like me but don't like him, and I'm trying to do the same thing to you see? I didn't quite make that, didn't get very far with that one.
Interestingly, though, they responded to that, I thought, very well. The young lady seated at the end said, well, we are not, we're still learners yet, and so we are not the status quo or the vested ones, and therefore it didn't irritate us as it might were we adults. It brings up a question about corrupting the youth. When you have a seminar, do you go in with the intention of teaching certain values? Or do you perceive the role of the seminar to simply expose or examine all values? And the reason I ask the question is at this time period in our own country, there's a lot of emphasis on schools right now on the whole issue of values and whether we are teaching or not. What should a teacher do and what should the role of these seminars be?
I think the seminar should never dogmatically teach anything. That's not its proper mode. It should examine, it should be a serious examination of values, yes, this was a certain value scheme out. But it shouldn't teach them in the sense of dogmatically proclaiming what the values are. Then it's not a seminar. It shouldn't dogmatically proclaim anything or dogmatically promulgate any truths. It should agitate the mind with good questions and keep the mind agitated with those questions.
See the conflict that exists within our country right now
Oh,
over
yes.
teaching children to think, which is what
the seminar's for.
He was guilty of, right?
Yeah.
And the pressure on us at the moment to, quote, teach values.
See,
and
Socrates never indoctrinated anyone, and I'm against indoctrination of any kind. So that I'm obviously against the trend in this country to indoctrinate the children with some set of values. I don't care what they are. Yes.
I wanted to ask you a question about what you think, what advantages you think are unique to doing the discussion of this by the seminar method. There'd be other ways. You could ask students to reconstruct a trial. It's a monologue, it's not a dialogue. No. They could be asked to make it into a dialogue. What do they get out of doing it by the seminar method that they might not get out of doing those other things?
The other things I'd have them do that too. I mean, let me say, I would have them do a piece, nothing substitutes for discussion. Nothing. No other method does what this does.
But what is that? That's what I want to sort of get at.
They're useful, but they don't do this. This activates their minds to face questions and follow the line of an argument. Defend them, make statements and defend them, you see. And have them defend them against one another in a cross-table kind of a debate. But I would connect a seminar with other exercises as follows. For example, after this seminar, suppose the last few minutes I said, now, will you all write for us, we had a group of teachers, a 2 or 3 page paper in which you put down as simply as possible how your understanding of the dialogue changed as a result of the discussion. You came to the discussion with one understanding. Did you leave it with the same understanding or with an altered understanding, and in what way altered? And then you take that piece of paper as an exercise in composition, and you'd correct it, make them rewrite it, and then you'd make them speak the point, to give an exercise in public speaking about it, see? In other words, you'd make the seminar serve a whole series of purposes. You might even try the thing you've said of constructing a defense, but say, see if you could defend Socrates better than he did himself. But that's not the same as a seminar. Those are other exercises. In other words, I'm agreeing with you that out of the seminar, a whole series of exercises have come, none of which do what the seminar does, but supplements it. Follow me?
I like your suggestion that we should all be generalists, because
Yeah.
I believe that's really what it's all about. And I've always said that people should be able to teach calculus as well as teach
Absolutely.
English.
Your point about the generalist is absolutely relevant. This calls for being a generalist, and by the way, it's to your own advantage to become a generalist, you see. I think the great virtue of the Paideia program from the point of view of the teacher, particularly the seminar part of it, is it gives life to the teacher's mind. Teaching didactically doesn't help you learn very much, but this kind of teaching, you learn a great deal. I've changed, I would say in the course of 60 years of teaching, I have learned more from the seminars I've conducted than any other thing I've done. All kinds of things happen, either because I've had to meet an argument I hadn't met before, or because I had to think of a question I hadn't thought about before. So this is the way to learn. And if a school isn't a place where teachers learn, it's no good at all. A school is a place where children learn, but more than that, teachers should be learning. And the seminar is the place for them to learn.